Chapter 1 Judgment from the Clouds. The heavens knew no night. In the Empyrean, the seat of the archangels, time was measured only by the intensity of the light radiating from the primordial source. Archangel Andrew had stood at the head of the host for thousands of years. His armor was forged not of metal, but of steadfast faith and sunbeams. His wings, a majestic span of brilliant white feathers, were a symbol of purity that had never tasted the dust of the earth. But now, he stood alone in the Hall of Echoes. Before him loomed 7 empty thrones, representing the will of creation. The voice that spoke did not emerge from a mouth but resonated within every atom of Andrew's being. Andrew, the guardians of the borders report that your flaming sword grew dim over the city of Lyrian. Why did you not end their cycle as was ordained? Andrew felt something foreign swelling in his chest, doubt. My lord, he began, his voice trembling like a lute string. I descended low, even to their rooftops. I intended to carry out the judgment. But then I saw an old man sharing his last bread with a stray dog. I saw a mother singing a lullaby to her child, even though she knew the end was near. If a spark of such love remains within them, how can we claim they are utterly corrupt? You were created to be an instrument, not a judge. The voice thundered, and the light in the hall turned red with anger. Your empathy is your downfall. Through it, you have allowed mortal weakness to stain your ethereal essence. You are no longer worthy to bear the light. In that moment, the celestial harmony turned into a discordant roar. 2 of his brothers, angels of justice, approached Andrew. Their faces were as if carved from marble, beautiful, yet utterly heartless. In their eyes, Andrew saw no pity, only a cold command. Without warning, they seized his shoulders. He felt the first touch of pain, a sensation angels were never meant to know. It was as if liquid lead had been poured into his veins. His white wings, which once carried him to the highest spheres, began to grow heavy. He watched in horror as the pure white feathers transformed. From the roots, a black rot spread, consuming the light. The feathers stiffened, matted together with blood and tar, until they turned into coal-black, broken stumps that clawed at his skin. Your pride shall be your burden, echoed through the hall like a death sentence. We cast you down into the world of mud and finality. You shall feel hunger, cold, and the weight of your deeds. Your redemption will not be found in prayers, but in the dust beneath your feet. The floor beneath Andrew vanished. The fall was infinite. He plummeted through spheres of fire, frost, and clouds. The atmosphere of the mortal world scorched his skin. Every meter of the descent tore away the remnants of his divinity. When he finally broke through the gray vault of clouds above the earth, he was nothing more than a falling shadow. He slammed into a muddy field on the edge of an unknown forest. The impact was crushing. Bones that were once light as air shattered. Andrew buried his face in the filthy earth and, for the first time in his eternal existence, did something human. He screamed. The pain was so intense it nearly drove him mad. He tasted the metallic tang of blood in his mouth, and felt the cold rain washing the soot from his ruined wings. He lay there, a broken archangel in the mud, listening to the silence of a world that was so cruel, and yet so real. The glow of his body faded. All that remained was a man in tattered, once golden armor, with black wings trailing in the mud like the shadow of his sin. Chapter 2 The Taste of Ash and Iron. The rain did not stop. It was not the clean, life-giving rain the seraphim sang of, but a cold, relentless veil that smelled of decaying leaves and wet stone. Andrew lay in a deep furrow that his body had carved into the waterlogged earth. Every breath felt like inhaling crushed glass. His lungs, once accustomed to pure ether, now had to struggle with the thick, humid air of mortals. He tried to move his arm. His fingers sank into slimy mud. The sensation shocked him. It was a tangible, unclean mass. He was no longer a being of thought and light. He was a prisoner in a shell of flesh and bone. He tried to move his arm. His fingers sank into slimy mud. The sensation shocked him. It was a tangible, unclean mass. He was no longer a being of thought and light. He was a prisoner in a shell of flesh and bone. I must get up, he whispered. His own voice sounded foreign to him. It was deep, rasping, and filled with a weakness he had never felt before. When he finally managed to stagger to his feet, the world spun. His once perfect sense of balance was gone. He looked around. He stood at the edge of a deep, black forest, its trees looking like the twisted fingers of giants clawing at the sky. In the distance, on the horizon, he saw a faint, flickering light. It was not an angelic glow, but the orange, restless shimmer of fire. He took a first step. And then a second. Every movement was accompanied by the metallic screech of his ruined armor, which was now more of a prison than a protection. The golden runes on his bracers had faded and turned black. After several dozen meters, he came upon a narrow, stony road. In the middle of the path stood a wooden cart, overturned on its side. Scattered around it were sacks of grain and broken barrels. And then he saw it. A body lay in the mud. A man, dressed in a simple linen robe, his throat slit so deeply that it was still steaming in the cold air. Andrew stopped. His first encounter with mortality was not heroic, but brutal. He leaned over the dead man, whose eyes were wide in a final flash of terror. The archangel who once commanded legions now felt his stomach turn. This was the reality he had spared in Lyrian, the reality of violence that humans face every day. "I am sorry," Andrew breathed, reaching out to place a hand on the man's forehead to give him a final blessing. At that moment, however, a shadow stepped out from the thick brush by the road. It was not just one. There were 5. Filthy men in tattered leather vests, with rusty swords and axes in their hands. Their eyes slid greedily over Andrew's armor, which even in the rain shimmered dimly with the remnants of celestial beauty. "Look at that," laughed one of them, a brute with a scar across his face. "Looks like more than just a bit of rain fell from the sky. That gold on his shoulders will feed us all winter." Andrew straightened up. Even in the ruins of his power, he looked imposing. The black stumps of his wings quivered slightly. "Go away, mortals," he said with the authority that remained in his blood. "This ground is already stained with the blood of an innocent. Do not add your own to it." The raiders looked at each other, and then burst into coarse laughter. "He's giving us orders! Look at those black rags on his back. He's just some cursed crow, nothing more." The leader of the bandits took a step forward and raised a heavy axe. Andrew felt the old fire trying to ignite within him, but instead of a flame, he felt only cold ash. He had to defend himself for the first time as a human, knowing that if he failed, his journey would end before it had even truly begun. Chapter 3: The Weight of Mortal Flesh. Andrew tried to summon his flaming sword. It was a motion he had performed for millennia, simply clenching his right hand and letting the ether crystallize into a blade of pure light. But this time, nothing happened. His fingers closed on empty air. Only the muscles in his forearm tightened convulsively. Instead of the searing heat of the heavens, he felt only a stabbing pain in his shoulder, where the bones had still not realigned after the fall. "Where is your magic crow?" the scarred brute mocked, taking another step forward. The mud beneath his boots squelched like a hungry mouth. The bandit leader struck first. The axe swung in a wide, clumsy arc. In Empyreum, Andrew would have seen the movement before it even began. Time used to flow differently for him. Now, however, his reflexes were trapped in a slow, heavy body. He dodged, but only a fraction of a second later than necessary. The axe blade did not cleave his chest, but it slammed into his left pauldron. The blow rattled him. The sound of metal striking metal resonated all the way to his teeth. Andrew staggered. The shock of the impact knocked the wind out of him, and for the first time, he felt the meaning of physical exhaustion. His heart, that new, frantic drum in his chest, was pounding so hard it throbbed in his temples. "He's still standing!" shouted another bandit, a gaunt man with a dagger, as he lunged from the side. Andrew instinctively lashed out with his left wing. It wasn't a graceful movement, but a desperate maneuver. The heavy, black mass of broken feathers and stiffened tar struck the attacker in the face. The man shrieked as the sharp tips of the feathers shredded his skin, and he was sent sprawling. But the price was high. The movement of the wing triggered such agony in Andrew's back that his vision went dark for a moment. The muscles that held the wings to his spine were not built to carry such weight without the support of divine power. He fell to one knee. Rain ran into his eyes, stinging like salt. "Look at him, he bleeds like a pig!" The brute laughed and spat on the ground. "The gold on him is nice, but look at that skin! Pale as a nobleman's. He's never held anything heavier than a cup of wine in his life." The bandits began to close the circle. Andrew felt his strength failing. His body was like a machine that had run out of fuel. Every muscle trembled with fatigue, the cold was seeping under his ruined armor, and the dampness chilled him to the bone. He felt humiliated. He, who had once driven back the shadows at the edge of the universe, could not now defeat 5 filthy mortals. "Father!" he whispered to the dark sky, but no answer came from above. Only thunder, rolling lazily over the mountains. The bandit leader raised his axe for the final blow. "Let's end this. I want those black wings of his as a trophy over my hearth. They'll look real nice next to the deer antlers." Andrew tried to stand, but his foot slipped in a pool of the dead merchant's blood. At the very moment the axe began to descend, he realized the terrifying truth of his redemption. In this world, he was not protected by his holiness. He could die. He could truly, definitively cease to exist in the mud by the road, forgotten and useless. That thought awakened something new within him. It was not the anger of an angel, but the survival instinct of a creature that wants to live. As the axe fell, Andrew did not attempt an elegant escape. He threw his entire weight forward, directly under the attacker's strike. His shoulder slammed into the bandit's stomach. The weight of his ruined wings, which had been a burden until now, gave him momentum this time. Both of them crashed into the mud. Andrew felt the coarse fabric of the bandit's vest under his hands, and the stench of his unwashed body. It was disgusting and far too close. A struggle for bare life began, a fight where there were no rituals, only fingernails, teeth, and blunt strikes to the face. While Andrew grappled in the mire with the leader, the other bandits hesitated for a moment, surprised by the sudden ferocity of their victim. At that moment, a whistle echoed from the forest. Short, sharp, and commanding. Chapter 4: A Shadow Among the Trees. The second when the axe was meant to fall stretched into infinity. Andrew lay in the mud, pressed against the brute's chest, feeling a foreign, mortal life pulsing beneath his fingers. The other raiders were already raising their weapons to finish the job when a sound that did not belong to the rainy night pierced the air. Thwip. The short, dry whistle was followed by a heavy thud. One of the bandits, the one with the dagger, suddenly stopped screaming. He looked down at his chest, where a long arrow with gray fletching had pierced his muddy vest. The man only let out a rasping wheeze and fell face first into a puddle. "What the hell?" the leader managed to bark before a figure emerged from the dense undergrowth at the edge of the road. "What the hell?" the leader managed to bark before a figure emerged from the dense undergrowth at the edge of the road. The figure was not tall, but moved with a lightness that Andrew, in his new, heavy body, could only envy. They were shrouded in a cloak the color of wet bark, which made them almost invisible in the gloom. The figure did not speak. With cold precision, they released a second arrow. It struck another raider in the thigh. The man collapsed to the ground, howling in terror. "Kill her! Kill that rat!" the bandit leader roared, trying to shake Andrew off him. Andrew, however, seized the moment of surprise. Though his muscles burned with fatigue, he braced himself and struck the brute's nose with his forehead using all his might. The crunch of bone was disgustingly loud. The bandit wailed and momentarily loosened his grip. At that moment, the cloaked figure ran directly among them. In their hands was no sword, but 2 short, curved blades that shimmered only dimly in the distant light of the raiders' fire. The figure moved like a dance of shadows, dodge, slash, pirouette. Within seconds, the remaining 2 capable bandits lay in the mud, clutching bleeding wounds. Silence returned to the road, interrupted only by Andrew's heavy breathing and the drumming of rain against the leaves. The cloaked figure stopped and slowly approached Andrew. She threw back her hood. It was a girl, perhaps slightly older than those Andrew had seen in Lyrian. She had short-cropped dark hair and a deep scar on her face that pulled the corner of her mouth into a permanent bitter smirk. Her eyes, however, were what struck Andrew most. There was no fear in them, but a deep, weary wisdom of someone who had already seen too many ends of the world. "Are you finished with your mud bath, Celestial?" She spoke coldly. Her voice was as sharp as her blades. Andrew looked at her, still on his knees. "Who are you?" he wheezed, feeling blood trickle from the corner of his mouth. "Someone who doesn't like a mess being made on her doorstep," she replied, sheathing her blades at her waist. Then she walked over to him, and, without the slightest hint of reverence, grabbed him by his ruined pauldron. "Get up! If you stay here, you'll be nothing but a frozen carcass by morning. And believe me, your feathers stink all the way to my camp." Andrew tried to stand, but his legs would not obey. The weight of his black wings pulled him relentlessly back to the ground. The girl sighed, shook her head, and slipped her arm under his shoulder. "Come on, hero. Lean on me. My name is Alara. And if you want to survive this night, you're going to have to forget you were ever anything more than a piece of meat with an unusual decoration on your back." Andrew leaned on her. Her body was small but firm as a rock. For the first time in his life, he felt a human touch that was not an attack, but help. It was warming and, at the same time, immensely humiliating. An archangel, led by a wounded mortal through the dark forest. "Why are you helping me?" he breathed as they dragged themselves away from the road strewn with dead bodies. Alara looked at him briefly, and her smirk deepened. "Because you look like someone who owes the world a very big apology. And I want to be there when you start paying it back." Chapter 5: Shadows Beneath the Moon. Alara's hideout was no palace. It was an old, partially collapsed watchtower, swallowed by the massive root system of a giant oak. Inside, it smelled of dried herbs, smoke, and old wood. A small fire pit in the center of the room provided just enough light to dispel the thickest shadows, but not enough to attract unwanted attention from the outside. Andrew sat on a heap of dry straw. Without warning, Alara pressed a rag soaked in a pungent decoction against the wound in his side. The pain was sharp and human. Andrew gritted his teeth so hard his jaw snapped. "Don't fight it," Alara growled without looking up. "Your body isn't made of ether anymore. Now you're just skin, muscle, and blood. If the rot gets into that wound, you'll die before you can say amen." "Why did you speak of a debt?" Andrew asked once the pain had receded slightly. "How do you know what I am?" Alara finally straightened up and set aside the blood-stained rag. In the firelight, she looked older than she had on the road. "You're not the first to fall, Celestial. But you're the first in 100 years. Legends of the fallen are passed down in my family. They say when a star falls into the mud, it brings either hope or final ruin. And looking at what's happening in the valley, we're going to need both." She walked to a narrow arrow slit and motioned for him to stand. Andrew rose with difficulty. Every movement of his black, broken wings was accompanied by a dull throbbing in his spine. He stepped toward her and looked out. In the distance, deep in the valley below them, lay a city. It was not, however, shrouded in a peaceful night. A thick, unnaturally black smoke hovered over its walls, hanging motionless in the air despite the rain. Lights flickered between the houses, but they were not the lights of lanterns. It was a violet, pulsing glow that resembled a festering wound in reality. "That is Oakhaven," Alara whispered, fear touching her voice for the first time. "Or what's left of it. 3 months ago, something woke up there. We call it the Void. It's not an army, it's not a disease. It's a hunger. People there simply cease to be people. They become hollow shells serving something that came from the depths of the earth." Andrew watched the violet flashes. He felt something familiar in them. It was an echo of the same power he had felt in Empyreum, but turned inside out. Pure order twisted into absolute tyranny. "That's why those bandits were so desperate," Alara continued. "They're running from it. Everyone is running. That thing in Oakhaven devours souls and memories. And worst of all, it's spreading. Every night the shadows grow a little longer. The forests are dying. The animals are going mad. She turned to him, her eyes burning with anger. You angels were supposed to protect us. You watched us from your golden thrones while hell opened up beneath us. And now that you're one of us, look at the devastation. That is the threat, Andrew. If it isn't stopped in Oakhaven, there will be nothing left for you to redeem. Andrew felt a weight heavier than his wings. He realized that while his refusal to destroy Lyrian might have been right, his indifference toward the rest of the world during his centuries of service was a sin he now had to repay. I know what it is, he said quietly. It is the Light Eater. An ancient entity my brothers imprisoned in the roots of the world long ago. We thought the prison would last forever. Forever ends pretty quickly down here, Elara snapped. We leave tomorrow morning. I need to reach the southern pass and warn the other settlements. You're coming with me. Not because I want you to, but because with those wings, the first Void sentry would smell you a mile away. I have to teach you how to hide, how to fight like a rat, and not like a god. Andrew nodded. He looked at his hands, dirty, with scraped knuckles and trembling from the cold. The path to redemption would no longer lead through heavenly gates, but through the heart of the darkness consuming this world. Teach me, he said firmly. Teach me how to be human. Chapter 6: The Ash of Angelic Pride. Morning in the forest was no more welcoming than the night had been. Mist crawled between the tree trunks like a gray wraith, and the dampness chilled him to the bone. Andrew sat on an uprooted log in front of the tower, attempting something he had once considered automatic. He wanted to master his own body. In front of him on the ground lay 2 wooden swords that Elara had hastily carved from oak branches. Pick it up, Elara commanded. She was already in motion, her body warmed by morning exercises. And stop looking at those hands as if they don't belong to you. They aren't made of light anymore. They are your tools. Nothing more, nothing less. Andrew reached for the piece of wood. His fingers were stiff, his knuckles swollen and blue from the frost. When he gripped the sword, its weight surprised him. It wasn't the weight of the wood, it was the weight of his own exhaustion. He attempted a basic stance, the stance of a heavenly guardian. He spread his legs, straightened his back, and tried to unfurl his wings for balance. In that instant, a searing pain shot through him. The black, broken wings only quivered helplessly in the mud, and their weight immediately dragged him backward. Andrew stumbled and fell onto his backside into the wet leaves. Elara didn't even move to help him. You're doing it again, she said coldly. Trying to be who you were. But that angel died up there, Andrew. Down here, you're just a man with an overgrown hump who can't even stand up straight. Andrew felt heat rising to his cheeks. It wasn't anger, it was pride refusing to surrender. I was a commander of legions. He spat through his teeth. I led wars your kin haven't even dreamed of. And look where you are now. Elara cut him off, her words like a blade. Your legions are gone. Your power is gone. All you have left is this piece of wood, and your will not to let the void eat you. So stop pitying yourself and get up. This time, without those damned wings. Forget you have them. Fight as if you were armless if you must, but get up. Andrew rose slowly and painfully. This time, he didn't strive for elegance. He braced his feet against the earth, feeling the mud squelch between his toes. Elara had given him old leather boots that were too small. He bowed his head so the wings wouldn't offset his center of gravity, and let them simply hang like a heavy cloak. The realization came suddenly and cruelly. To survive, he truly had to let the angel within him die. He had to accept that he was vulnerable. That he could feel the hunger now twisting his stomach, and the fear of another fall. He grasped the practice sword with both hands. He no longer held it as a ritual weapon, but as a tool for survival. Good! Elara nodded, and for the first time, her voice didn't hold only contempt. Now try to hit me. But remember, your wings are not your pride. They are now your greatest weakness. If you don't watch them, an enemy will use them as a handle to break your neck. The following hours were a lesson in humility. Elara was faster, more agile, and didn't shy away from dirty tricks. She kicked mud into his eyes, tripped him, and repeatedly struck him in the back, right between the shoulder blades where the wings were anchored to the flesh. Andrew fell and rose again. Each time he picked himself up from the dust, he felt a little less like a fallen god and a little more like a man. He learned to compensate for the weight of the wings with the movement of his hips. He learned to use their bulk to hide behind them like a shield, instead of trying to fly with them. When the sun, if that gray disk could be called such, climbed to its zenith, Andrew stood by the stream, washing blood and sweat from his face. He looked at his reflection in the water. He saw a bearded face, sunken eyes, and dirt under his fingernails. But he also saw something else, a spark of determination that wasn't granted by heavenly decree, but by his own choice. "Today you took the first step towards staying alive," Elara said, appearing behind him. "But the redemption you spoke of, that doesn't start with a sword. It starts with understanding why the people down there are worth bleeding for." Andrew looked at his black wings. They no longer felt like just a punishment. They were the weight of the world he had chosen to carry. "I understand," he said in a quiet, steady voice. "I am no longer an archangel. I am just Andrew. And I will do what is necessary." At that moment, a piercing, unnatural shriek echoed from the forest. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of tearing metal and a sobbing soul. The void had sent its first scouts. Chapter 7: Echoes of Lost Souls. The shriek rang out again, closer this time. It wasn't a clean sound. Within it, one could hear the crushing of bone and a strange, mechanical clicking, as if someone were striking stones together. Elara immediately extinguished the rest of the fire pit, and, with one fluid motion, adjusted the quiver on her back. "They're here," she whispered. "Remember what I told you. Don't look them in the eyes. There's nothing left in there of who they used to be." Figures began to emerge from the mist. The first thing Andrew saw were not faces, but a violet smoke crawling around their limbs. They were human, once. Now they were puppets of flesh, their skin the color of bruises, stretched tight over emaciated bodies. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if each limb were fighting the other. Most terrifying, however, were their faces. Where eyes should have been, empty, violet craters glowed, from which a black liquid welled. "That was the blacksmith from Oakhaven," Elara breathed, pointing to the largest of them, who still clutched a heavy hammer, now fused to his own palm through the dark tendons of the void. "And the woman behind him, that's Mara. She had the best apothecary in the valley." Andrew felt a wave of icy dread. These were not beings he could defeat with a noble speech or heavenly punishment. They were captives of their own pain. "What did it do to them?" Andrew exhaled, firmly gripping his wooden sword, which felt desperately inadequate in that moment. "It took everything from them," Elara snapped. "Memories, love, even the fear of death. Now they are just hungry apertures in reality. Shoot!" The first arrow from Elara's bow sliced through the air and struck the blacksmith directly in the chest. The man didn't even flinch. He continued forward as if the arrow were merely a bothersome insect. The violet glow in his empty eyes only intensified. "You have to hack them apart or take off their heads," Elara shouted, dropping her bow and drawing her twin blades. "Otherwise, they'll just keep crawling." Andrew stepped into the path of the woman approaching him. Mara, the herbalist. Her lips moved as if she were trying to say something, but only the dry, wheezing sound of the void came out. "Forgive me," Andrew whispered. It was the first time he had asked forgiveness from a mortal he was once meant to protect. Mara lunged at him with incredible speed. This time, Andrew did not retreat like an angel, but like a man. He crouched, letting the weight of his black wings stabilize him in the mud, and swung the wooden sword with all his might. The blow aimed for her knees. The wood groaned, bones cracked, and the woman fell to the ground. But Mara immediately tried to crawl further, her fingers clawing into the earth as the violet smoke propelled her forward. Andrew saw that Elara was fighting the blacksmith. She was fast, but the strength of the void was overwhelming. Every strike of the blacksmith's hammer shattered a piece of the watchtower or the stone beneath his feet. Andrew knew he wouldn't stop the blacksmith with his piece of wood. He looked around and saw the fallen bandits from the night before lying nearby. Among them lay the rusty but steel sword of the bandit leader. It was a risk. He had to run across open ground. Mara caught him by one of his black wings. The pain was blinding. He felt her nails tearing the sensitive tissue beneath the black feathers. Andrew screamed, but he did not back down. He freed himself with a kick and lunged for the sword. He gripped the cold steel hilt. In that moment, something happened. The sword wasn't magical, it wasn't celestial metal, but Andrew's will for redemption momentarily infused it with the remnant of his old essence. The blade didn't begin to glow with light, but it started to vibrate with a pure, silver tone. He turned just in time to see the blacksmith hurl Alara against the tower wall. Andrew roared. It wasn't the voice of an angel. It was the roar of a man who no longer intended to stand idly by and watch the devastation. In a few leaps he was at the blacksmith. The weight of his wings helped his rotation this time. He swung the sword in a powerful arc. The steel sliced through the violet mist and the blacksmith's throat. The giant's body stopped, the violet light in his eyes dissipated into gray ash, and the blacksmith finally collapsed to the ground like the dead man he had long since become. Andrew stood over him, the sword trembling in his hand, silvery blood mixed with the black tar of the void dripping from his black wings. Alara rose with effort, wiped blood from her forehead, and looked at him. "You killed them," she panted. "But it wasn't easy, was it?" "It was horrible," Andrew said, looking at his hands. "I felt their pain. But I also felt that deep down, they were thankful when it ended." "That is your gift and your curse, Celestial," Alara said, sheathing her blades. "To feel what we feel. Now you know what awaits us in Oakhaven. They aren't monsters we are meant to hate. They are our neighbors whom we must release." Andrew looked at the forest. The violet mist was receding, but he knew it was only temporary. He had just understood that his redemption would not consist of heroic deeds, but of the merciful death he would have to bring to those to whom he could no longer return life. Chapter 8 Mirror of the Damned. The Dead Woods was a place where even time seemed to be ailing. Trees stood here stripped of their bark, their white trunks resembling the bones of giants driven into the earth. The mist here was not mere moisture, it was a thick, violet haze that tasted not of water, but of metal and old promises. "Don't look into the mist for too long," Alara warned, wrapping a piece of linen cloth around her mouth. "The void won't just tear you apart. First, it will try to convince you that you're already dead. It will show you your worst memories and dress them up as the truth." Andrew nodded, but he felt a faint ringing starting in his ears. His black feathers bristled. His wings, sensitive to spiritual tremors, picked up vibrations that Alara could not hear. It was like thousands of whispering voices trying to find a crack in his mind. They progressed slowly. Every snap of a branch beneath a boot sounded like a gunshot. Suddenly, the mist around Andrew thickened so much that he lost sight of Alara. "Alara?" he called out, but his voice returned to him mutated, mocking. "Alara! Alara!" echoed from behind one of the white trees. But it wasn't her voice. It was a voice pure, harmonious, and cold. A voice Andrew knew better than his own. A figure stepped out of the haze. He was tall, clad in plate armor that shone so brightly it made Andrew's eyes sting. He had 6 wings, each perfect, white, and motionless as if carved from marble. It was Archangel Michael, Andrew's former mentor and closest brother-in-arms. "Look at yourself, brother," Michael said, and there was no anger in his voice, only deep contempt. "You traded eternity for dirt. You traded light for this black filth hanging from your back." Andrew recoiled, the bandit's sword trembling in his hand. "You aren't real. You're just a shadow in my head." "Reality is what you feel, Andrew." The specter smiled, taking a step forward. The ground beneath his feet did not rot, instead, it turned to crystal. "Do you feel this cold? This weight in your bones? Is this your redemption? To toil in the mud with a mortal girl who hates you for what you used to be?" Do you think these people will forget how many of their cities you once let burn because you were just following orders? Other figures began to appear around Michael. They were the angels Andrew had once led. They pointed their fingers at him, their eyeless faces mocking him. Traitor! They whispered. Murderer! Fallen star! Andrew felt his shoulders slump. The weight of his black wings seemed unbearable in that moment, as if every feather weighed a pound of lead. He wanted to kneel. He wanted to apologize. The void was attacking his greatest weakness, his desire to be pure again, to be one of them once more. All you have to do is say you were wrong, Michael's voice said, now close to his ear. Give up this futile hope of saving these worms. Let the void finish its work, and we will take you back. We will cleanse you. You will fly again. Andrew closed his eyes. The image of flight, that feeling of utter freedom in infinite light, was almost irresistible. All he had to do was stop trying. All he had to do was leave Alara and this whole filthy world behind. But in that very moment, he remembered another touch. He remembered how Alara, small and wounded, had propped him up in the mud. He remembered the blacksmith who, in the depths of his pain, found the strength to thank him for death. He remembered the mother and Lyrian. These people weren't perfect. They were weak, flawed, and mortal. But they were real. Michael and his heavenly pride now seemed to him like a beautiful but hollow statue. He spread his black, disfigured wings. This time, he didn't use them for flight, but to lash out violently around him. The heavy, black mass tore through the violet mist. You are not my brothers! Andrew roared. You are just echoes of my fear. And I am no longer afraid of you. With a pained hiss, the apparitions began to crumble. Michael's face distorted into a hideous mask of the void, and then dissipated into grey ash. The mist parted, and Andrew saw Alara standing only a few meters away. Her face was pale, she held a dagger in her hand, and she was staring into the emptiness as if she too were fighting her demons. Andrew approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Alara flinched, but when she saw his eyes, tired, human, but clear, she exhaled and leaned against him. Did you see them too? He asked softly. I saw my family, she whispered. They told me it was my fault they died. That I should have stayed in Oakhaven and burned with them. Andrew squeezed her shoulder firmly. They lied. The void feeds on what hurts us most. But we are still here. And we move on. Alara looked at him, and for the first time, there was not just cynicism in her eyes, but a glimmer of respect. Your wings, for a moment, I thought I felt heat radiating from them. Not like a fire, but like a blacksmith's forge. Andrew looked at his black feathers. They were still black, still broken. But at the very tips, where they had touched the truth, a tiny, almost invisible edge of silver had appeared. The path to redemption was not about returning to who he was, but about who he was becoming. Chapter 9, Whispers in the Ash. Oakhaven had once been the jewel of the valley, a city of white stone and blooming gardens. Now, as Andrew and Alara looked down from the ridge of a rocky overhang, it looked like the disgorged entrails of a giant creature. The stone houses were overgrown with violet crystals that pulsed to the rhythm of a slow, sickly heart. The air shimmered with heat despite the cold, and grey ash drifted everywhere, not from fire, but from a decaying reality. The main gate is guarded by those things, Alara whispered, pointing to the shapeless shadows and city guard armor standing rigidly at the entrance. But there's an old sewer line running under the eastern wall. It comes out right beneath the temple, where I feel the greatest concentration of rot. Andrew nodded. He folded his black wings as tightly as possible against his back and secured them with an old leather strap so the feathers wouldn't rub together and make a sound. We must be invisible. If they discover us in the middle of the city, we'll have nowhere to run. They descended into the valley with the caution of wolves. The city was hauntingly silent. No barking of dogs, no crying, not even the wind in the ruins sounded natural. Everyday objects lay everywhere, a doll, a broken jug, shoes, as if people had simply evaporated from existence in a second. They entered the sewer tunnel. The water within was thick and black, with violet oil slicks. Andrew felt the sludge eating away at the skin on his feet, but he didn't utter a sound. His angelic senses, though weakened, screamed with warning. Every meter they drew closer to the center meant more pressure in his skull. "Do you hear that?" Andrew asked when they stopped beneath an iron grate leading to the square. "I hear only the blood in my ears," Alara replied, carefully lifting the hatch. "No. It's singing," Andrew whispered. "But it's backward. It's a prayer to the void." They climbed out into the shadow of a collapsed bakery. Directly in front of them loomed the temple. Dozens of figures in gray robes knelt on its steps. They weren't the twitching mutants they had encountered in the forest. These were calm, their movements synchronized. In the middle of the square floated a massive sphere of pure darkness that sucked the light from its surroundings. A man stood at the head of the ritual. His robes had once been priestly, but now black tendrils emerged from him, connecting him to the sphere of darkness. "That's Father Malachi." Alara recognized him, the dagger trembling in her hand. "He was the kindest man in the valley. Now he's an anchor." "He is not Malachi," Andrew said, feeling the silvery blood begin to course through his veins again in response to the presence of pure evil. "He is just a mask for the Eater. The ritual, they aren't just trying to release the entity. They are building it a body. They want to give it physical form so it can devour not just souls, but the land itself." Suddenly, the sphere of darkness shuddered and sent out a wave of freezing pressure. Both Alara and Andrew had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. One of the black tendrils turned lazily in their direction. "It senses us," Andrew breathed. "Silence won't help us anymore. We have to break the circle before the sphere collapses in on itself and opens the gate." Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting both determination and fear. "We only have one shot. If Malachi doesn't die, this city becomes the cradle of the end of the world." Andrew drew his sword. He realized that his redemption had just taken a concrete shape. He must destroy what he once swore to protect, sanctity that had curdled into madness. Chapter 10: The Price of Light. The air in Oakhaven Square was so thick that every breath tasted of burnt flesh and bile. The sphere of darkness above the temple pulsed, and with every beat, it sent out waves of phase shifts that warped reality around it. The stones of the square were turning to dust, while the dust turned into black crystals. "Now!" Alara screamed, lunging from the shadows like a shot arrow. Her daggers danced among the cultists in gray robes. They were not warriors, but their bodies were permeated by the void, so even when she pierced them, they did not fall immediately. Andrew charged directly toward Malachi. His black wings were still bound tight, but the weight of sin they represented now gave him a brutal momentum. Malachi, or what remained of him, raised a hand. Whips of black energy lashed out from his fingers. Andrew dodged them only thanks to instincts as old as the stars, but one of the whips caught him in his left side. His celestial ceramic armor shattered, and Andrew felt a cold that was not of this world. It was as if someone had erased the memory of warmth from his mind. "Fallen angel," Malachi hissed in a voice that sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Your soul is already but a shadow. Why not surrender it all? The Eater will give you the peace that Empyrean denied you." Andrew felt his human strength failing. A sword of common steel was like a child's toy against an entity of such caliber. He saw Alara beginning to succumb to the numbers. The cultists were surrounding her, and her movements were slowing under the pressure of the darkness. In that moment, Andrew understood. As a man, he would fail. As a fallen angel, he would die. The only way to stop the ritual was to reach deep inside himself, to the very core of his being, and ignite a fire that had been forbidden to him upon his fall. It was the forbidden chant, a power that did not use divine grace, but burned the very essence of the angelic soul as fuel. "Andrew, no!" Alara cried out, as if sensing what he was about to do. Andrew closed his eyes and mentally returned to his black, disfigured wings. He stopped resisting their weight. Instead, he embraced it. He concentrated all his pain, his guilt for Lyrian, and his love for this broken world into a single point in his heart. Then, he let that point explode. A white light of heaven did not flash through the square. Instead, a blinding, silvery gray flame erupted from Andrew's back. His black wings began to disintegrate in that heat, not into dust, but into pure energy. Every feather that burned tore away a piece of his eternal essence. He felt himself forgetting the faces of his brothers, losing the ability to ever hear the music of the spheres again. With this destructive flame in his hands, he grasped his rusty sword. The steel melted instantly, transforming into a blade of liquid, glowing silver. For those who have no voice! Andrew roared and struck. The silver flame sliced through the black whips of energy and hit Malachi directly in the chest. The priest arched, black liquid erupting from his mouth and turning to steam upon contact with Andrew's fire. The sphere of darkness above them howled. It was the sound of 1,000 souls tearing, and began to collapse in on itself. Andrew did not relent. He pushed further, even as he felt the flame searing his own skin and his consciousness shredding into pieces. He sacrificed his immortality, his chance to return, his very definition of an angel. A white void followed. When the smoke cleared, the square was silent. The sphere was gone. The cultists lay on the ground like empty ragdolls. Malachi's body was but ash in the ruins of his robes. Andrew lay on his back, staring at the sky. His wings, those massive black wings, were no longer there. All that remained were charred, short stumps from which a faint smoke rose. His eyes, once bright, were now dull and human. Elara ran to him and knelt in the dust. "Andrew? Can you hear me?" Andrew tried to smile, but his lips only cracked. "They don't weigh me down anymore," he whispered. "You did it." Elara wept, taking his hand for the first time not as a teacher, but as a friend. "But at what price?" Andrew closed his eyes. He felt incredibly light and incredibly empty. He had just redeemed the city, but he paid for it with the fact that only a tiny spark of who he once was remained within him. He was no longer an angel, nor fallen. He was something new. Something that would have to learn to live with scars on its soul. Chapter 11: The Song of Scars. Andrew awoke to a world that was silent, but no longer dead. The violet haze over Oak Haven had vanished, replaced by a gray, cold dawn. He lay on the stone floor of the temple, feeling every crack in the granite beneath his back. The pain, which had once been a blinding fire, had settled into a dull, rhythmic pulse. He tried to move his shoulders. What remained of his wings, the charred stumps that had once felt like symbols of his greatest defeat, was no longer dead weight. He felt no strength for flight in them, but he felt something else. Something that vibrated in harmony with the world around him. Elara sat nearby, cleaning her blades. When she saw him open his eyes, she immediately approached him. "You look different," she said, hesitating. "Your eyes. That heavenly chill is gone. They are brown. Like the earth." Andrew sat up with her help. He looked at his palms. They were no longer radiant. They were calloused, dirty, and covered in scars from the fight. But when he touched the stone of the temple, a vision flashed through his mind. It was not a vision of celestial glory, but of the laborer who had carved that stone centuries ago. He felt the man's exhaustion, and his hope that he was building something that would outlast him. "Everything has changed, Elara," Andrew whispered. "My magic, the heavenly kind, is gone. It burned up in that flame. But in its place, I hear things." "What do you hear?" Andrew looked toward a group of survivors slowly gathering in the square. They were confused, wounded, and broken. Before, he would have seen them only as biological units requiring salvation. Now, however, he felt their grief like a fine thread touching his own heart. "I hear their souls," Andrew replied. "Not as words, but as a melody. Every scar they have has its own tone." He stood up and walked slowly toward a young woman sobbing over the ruins of her home. Elara watched him intently. Andrew did not begin to preach about a divine plan, nor did he attempt a miraculous healing. Instead, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. A faint, silvery dust released from his charred wings. It was not a light that burned, but a warmth that understood. The woman stopped crying. She looked at Andrew, and for the first time since the infection began, peace appeared in her eyes. She did not forget her pain, but the pain stopped crushing her. Andrew took it into himself. "That is your new kind of power," Alara whispered, stepping closer. "You are no longer the one who judges from above. You are the one who bears the weight with us. Your sacrifice took your wings, but it gave you the ability to share the burden." Andrew nodded. He felt weaker than ever, yet stronger in places he hadn't known existed within him. But with this gift came a new danger. By opening himself to human suffering, he had become a beacon for the Light Eater. "It senses me," Andrew said, looking toward the dark mountains to the north, where the rest of the void had retreated. "To it, I am no longer just a fallen angel to be destroyed. I am a threat because I am taking away its only food, despair." "In that case," Alara said, handing him his sword, which was now just a simple piece of steel, "we will have to turn that despair into rage. Oakhaven was only the beginning. The Eater will now try to poison the very roots of the world." Andrew gripped the hilt of the sword. For the first time in his long life, he felt that his path to redemption did not lead back to the thrones, but deeper into the hearts of those who suffer. Chapter 12: A Dance with the Fever of Souls. The road to the Crying Mountains led through the Valley of Oblivion, a landscape where mist clung constantly to the ground like a gray shroud. Andrew and Alara arrived at a settlement called Grey Creek just as the sun was a mere pale smudge in the sky. The village was eerily silent. No smoke rose from the chimneys, and grain rotted in the fields, unharvested. "Do you feel it?" Alara whispered, instinctively drawing one of her daggers. "The air here is heavy, as if you could drown in it." Andrew stopped. His charred wings shuddered beneath his cloak. He felt more than just the weight of the air, he felt a disharmony. It was as if someone were playing an out-of-tune instrument directly inside his head. "This isn't the void in its pure form," he said softly. "It's an echo. An epidemic of hopelessness." They entered the first cottage. A family lay there on a bed, father, mother, and 2 children. Physically they appeared fine, but their eyes were open and vacant. They did not move, they did not speak. They simply stared at the ceiling while a faint, violet smoke emanated from their skin. "They are alive, but their souls are trapped in an endless loop of their worst memories," Andrew explained. He stepped toward the youngest child and placed a hand on his chest. He was instantly hit by a wave of pure terror, visions of a dark figure carrying away the light, the sound of the world tearing apart. Andrew staggered. Before, he would have simply purged such an infection with heavenly fire. Now, however, he had to use his new power. "Alara, I must enter that darkness," he said, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "I have to pull that pain into myself. But there are dozens of them here. If I do it for each one individually, it will consume me before we even reach the mountains." "Then do it all at once," Alara suggested. "Take my hand. I will be your anchor, so you don't drown in their ocean." They walked out to the village square, where the greatest concentration of that spiritual rot had gathered. Andrew sat on the ground in the center of the settlement. Alara knelt behind him, placed her hands on his shoulders, and braced herself firmly. Andrew spread what remained of his wings. The charred stumps did not glow, but they began to vibrate. Andrew opened his consciousness wide. It felt as if liquid lead were being poured into his ears. He heard the wailing of the entire village. He felt every failure, every loss, every pang of conscience these people had ever felt. Thousands of shards of pain began to prick him like needles. His body began to shake uncontrollably. A low, raspy sound escaped his throat. The silvery dust from his wings swirled around them like a small storm. "Let it pass through you, Andrew!" Alara shouted, though the weight was pressing even her to the ground. "Don't keep it! You are just a conduit!" Andrew understood. He wasn't meant to just accept the pain, he was meant to transform it. Within his core, he began to crush that dark energy with his own will for redemption. What was hopelessness, he changed into compassion. What was fear, he changed into the recognition of a shared fate. Suddenly, a pressure wave erupted from Andrew's body. It wasn't light, but a transparent tremor that rippled through the entire village. The violet smoke dissipated. In the cottages, the first deep breaths could be heard. Children began to cry, parents began to embrace. Life was returning, but the price was visible on Andrew. His skin was even paler now, deep shadows circled his eyes, and new, red cracks appeared on his charred wings. He lay exhausted in the mud, Elara holding him in her arms. "They are free," Andrew exhaled. "But the Eater knows exactly where I am now." That wave was like a gunshot in the silence. "Then let him know," Elara said, wiping his forehead. "Today you saved 50 souls without a single stroke of a sword. That's more than your brothers ever did in their golden armor." Andrew looked at the villagers as they began to step out of their doors. They looked at him not with awe for a god, but with gratitude for someone who had shared their hell. It was then he realized that his redemption was not about becoming an angel again, but about becoming a perfect sanctuary for humanity. Chapter 13: The Iron Warden of Forgotten Thresholds. The foot of the crying mountains was not formed of stone, but of the frozen agony of the earth. The rocks here were the color of dried blood, and the wind that tore through the gorges sounded like an endless sob. The higher Andrew and Elara climbed, the thinner the air became, and the more strongly Andrew felt the proximity of the Light Eater's prison. It was like standing before a colossal cauldron radiating a piercing, numbing chill. The path to the only pass, however, was intersected by a massive gate carved directly into the mountain. Before it stood a figure that seemed to have grown from the rock itself. It was the Warden of Thresholds. It was neither angel nor man, but a being fashioned from steel and ancient runes. Its armor was coated in a layer of frost, and in its hands, it gripped a massive two-handed hammer, the head of which was forged into the likeness of a screaming face. "Halt!" thundered the Warden's voice, triggering small avalanches on the surrounding slopes. "No one impure may pass to the seals. Return to the mud from which you sprang." Andrew stepped forward, leaning on his simple sword. "I am Andrew, formerly an Archangel of Empyreum. I come to prevent the Eater's awakening." The Warden slowly lowered its head, and its blue eye slits fixed upon Andrew's charred wings. "I see only a shadow that lies. I see a fallen being carrying the rod of mortality and the stench of the void. You are desecrated, fallen. Your coming would only weaken the seals." "He saved our lives!" Elara cried out, reaching for her bow. "Without him, the valley wouldn't even exist anymore. The words of mortals are like leaves in the wind." The being snapped, raising its hammer. "My command is absolute. Passage is permitted only to those whose light is unstained. You, fallen one, are darkness. Prepare for judgment." Andrew understood that words would not suffice this time. The Warden was programmed for a perfection that Andrew had long since lost. He had to fight, but he knew that against such power, his human body stood no chance of victory through raw strength. "Elara, stay back," Andrew commanded. "This is my fight. I must prove to him that there is strength even in ruins." The battle began without warning. The Warden moved with unexpected speed, its hammer tracing a crushing arc. Andrew did not dodge away. Instead, he lunged forward beneath the strike. The ground where he had stood a second before exploded into 1,000 shards. Andrew attempted a slash, but his steel sword only slid harmlessly off the Warden's runic armor. With a strike of its elbow, the Warden threw him 30 feet away. Andrew landed in the sharp gravel and felt his shoulder snap. "Your weakness is proof of your guilt," the Warden declared, marching toward him with the relentless regularity of a metronome. Andrew rose with effort, tasting blood in his mouth. But with the blood came that new sensation, his power to share suffering. This time, however, he did not aim it at healing, but at the Warden. Through the touch of his energy, he felt the Warden's essence. It was lonely. Thousands of years standing in the frost, thousands of years without a single touch of life. You are a prisoner too," Andrew wheezed, moving back into a defensive stance. "You think you serve order, But you are just a forgotten tool of those who left you here. Silence! The warden roared and attacked again, this time with a series of rapid strikes. Andrew danced on the edge of death. Every movement pained him, every parry tore at his muscles. But with every clash, Andrew connected more deeply with the warden's energy. He stopped trying to kill the warden. Instead, he began to use the remaining silver essence from his wings to infect the warden with human emotion. The warden slowly lowered the hammer and rested it on the ground. Its massive shoulders slumped, as if the weariness of the entire world had settled upon them after centuries. It looked at Andrew and then at Alara, who was watching its every move with her bow drawn tight. "You are not an angel," the warden spoke after a long silence. "You are something more. You are a bridge between that which is eternal and that which ends. Pass, Andrew. But know that beyond this gate, your suffering will no longer be your strength, but your greatest weakness. The Eater will be waiting for it." With a deep thudding rumble, the massive gate began to open. Chapter 14: The Mirror of Truth. The air inside the mountain was stagnant and freezing, saturated with the scent of ozone and ancient, forgotten dust. The Hall of Echoes was not merely a cavern, it was a geometrically perfect cathedral carved into black obsidian. In the center of the hall, surrounded by 7 pulsing pillars of energy, the seals, floated a vast surface resembling the face of still water, suspended vertically in space. The Mirror of Truth. "I can feel him," Alara whispered, clutching her chest. "The prison, it doesn't just hold the Eater in chains. It's poisoning him." Andrew took a step forward. The seals hummed with a deep tone that resonated within his charred wing stumps. "To repair the seals, I must enter the mirror. I must look at who I was, stripped of all the lies I've told myself." "I'm coming with you," Alara said, stepping toward him. "No." Andrew stopped her gently but firmly. "This is a trial of identity. The mirror reflects only what belongs to my essence. If you were to enter, it could tear you apart into memories I cannot bear." Andrew took a breath, for the first time with full awareness of his human lungs, and stepped into the cold, silvery surface of the mirror. The world around him vanished. He was no longer in the cavern. He stood on the battlefield above the city of Lyrian, thousands of years in the past. He saw himself, radiant, motionless, an archangel with wings as pure as fallen snow. In his hand, he held a sword of white fire, and in his eyes was absolute, cold justice. "Do you see me?" the voice of his past self spoke. It was beautiful, harmonious, but lacked any hint of warmth. "You were perfect. You were the law. Why did you trade yourself for this?" The mirror began to project Andrew's memories, but not as he remembered them. It showed him the faces of thousands of people he had allowed to die in other wars Alara knew nothing about. It showed him his pride, with which he had looked upon mortals as mere insects in the cycle of the cosmos. "Your redemption is just another form of your pride," the image of the archangel continued. "Do you think your suffering has value? Do you think that by suffering with them, you are erasing the blood on your hands? No. You are just enjoying the feeling of being a martyr so you don't have to face the emptiness of your own existence." Andrew felt the ground vanishing beneath his feet. The mirror was not attacking his actions, but his motives. Was his help to the people true compassion, or just a desperate attempt to save his own soul from punishment? The image of the archangel lashed its wings and struck Andrew to his knees. "Look at your stumps. They are the symbol of your failure. You are a traitor to heaven and a stranger on earth. You belong nowhere." Andrew dug his fingers into the illusory dust of the mirror. He felt doubt consuming him. But then, in that darkness, he felt something else. A small, glowing spark of pain that was not his own. It was the echo of Alara, waiting for him outside. It was the memory of the mother from Oakhaven. "You're right," Andrew whispered, lifting his head. "My pride brought me here. And perhaps even my desire for redemption is selfish." The image of the archangel smiled triumphantly, but Andrew continued. "But my pain is real. And the love I feel for these broken beings, even if I didn't understand it before, that no longer belongs to me. It belongs to them. If I am a traitor to heaven, so be it. If I am a stranger on earth, I accept it. But I will not look back with a longing for your perfection. Because your perfection was blind. Andrew stood up. For the first time, he did not try to straighten himself to look majestic. He let his charred wings hang, his face remain dirty, and his body stay weary. I am no longer the one who holds the sword of justice, Andrew said firmly. I am the one who holds the hand of the dying. And that is more than you ever were. In that moment, the mirror of truth shattered. Not into sharp shards, but into millions of sparks of light that began to sink into Andrew's body. The illusion of the perfect archangel vanished. Andrew found himself back in the Hall of Echoes. But something had changed. The 7 seals, which had previously only hummed, now glowed with a silvery radiance that matched the tone of Andrew's new power. By accepting his imperfection, he had become the key. Andrew! Elara cried out, running to him. Did it work? The seals are calm. Not yet, Andrew said, looking at the central pillar, where an opening for the final sacrifice was now appearing. The mirror showed me the way. The seals don't need my blood, nor my power. They need my story. I must become part of the prison to keep it closed. From the depths of the mountain, a dark, hungry laughter echoed. The Light Eater felt that its time was drawing near. Chapter 15: The Bond of Mortality. The Hall of Echoes began to tremble. The silvery glow of the seals, which for a moment had seemed stable, began to turn a bloody red under the onslaught of sheer hatred welling up from the depths below. The Light Eater understood that Andrew intended to sacrifice the last thing connecting him to eternity, his memories of heaven. I have to do it, Elara, Andrew said, his voice fading into the rumble of falling stone. If I place the purity of Empyreum into the seals, they will become indestructible. But I will forget everything. I will forget what the light of the first source looks like. I will forget the song of the spheres. I will become nothing but an empty vessel in human skin. Elara grabbed his wrist. Her grip was convulsive. And will you forget me too? Will you forget Oakhaven? Why you did all this? Andrew looked into her eyes. When I surrender my angelic essence, everything inscribed in my ethereal soul will vanish. Only what this body has learned will remain. It is a risk I must take so that the world may live. Andrew stepped toward the central pillar. He placed both palms on the cold surface. He began the ritual. He felt the first memories tearing away from his mind, visions of golden palaces, the faces of angelic brothers, the feeling of soaring above the clouds. It was as if someone were plucking shards of gemstones from his head. At that moment, however, the ground beneath them split open. It wasn't a monster that erupted from the rift, but a wave of black, parasitic consciousness. The Light Eater spoke directly to Elara, not to Andrew. Do you see him? He wants to leave you. He wants to become a puppet without memory. But I offer you a different path, mortal. Give him your blood. Mix your human suffering with his remaining power. Repair the seals together, without the sacrifice of his memories. He will remain who he is. He will stay with you. Elara, don't listen to him. Andrew roared, while his body began to glow with a blinding, fading light. Elara looked at Andrew, who was vanishing before her eyes in the agony of the ritual. She saw his pain and knew that if he completed his sacrifice, she would lose a friend and the world would lose a hero who could lead it. She wanted to save him. She wanted him to remain himself. She reached for her dagger and, instead of attacking the darkness, she cut into her palm. She pressed her bloodied hand onto Andrew's back, directly between the charred stumps of his wings. I won't let you go into the void alone, she cried out. In that second, the ritual inverted. The blood of a mortal, full of emotion, fear, and love, mingled with the angelic essence. The seals did not harden into indestructible heavenly diamond. Instead, they transformed into something living, pulsing, and fragile. It was a human knot. The seals were repaired, but they were no longer held by divine power, but by the strength of their mutual bond. The Eater was cast back, its hunger sated for a time, But the prison was no longer absolute. It was now tethered to their lives. As long as the two of them believed in hope, the prison would hold. However, if their bond broke, or if they fell into despair, the Eater would break free with tenfold strength. The mountain went silent. The glow faded. Andrew slumped to the ground, still remembering everything, his guilt, his pride, and Alara. But his charred wings had changed. They were no longer stumps. In their place remained only two long, deep scars crossing his back like a reminder of what he had sacrificed. "What have you done?" Andrew exhaled, looking at Alara. He felt power within him, but it was a power now dangerously intertwined with every beat of his heart. "I saved you," Alara said, her voice trembling. "Perhaps I have condemned the world to an eternal struggle by doing so, but I will not allow you to be just an empty statue. If the world is to survive, it must survive with us. Exactly as we are." Andrew looked around the Hall of Echoes. The seals were beating like a heart. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The world was not definitively saved, it had only been given a chance to fight another day. And the price for this decision was etched into the very fabric of reality. Chapter 16: Fractures in the Soul. The return from the Crying Mountains was no victory march. Andrew and Alara walked in silence, lashed by a freezing wind that seemed to try to crawl beneath their skin. Andrew no longer had wings, not even their charred remains. On his back 2 scars burned, pulsing every time his mind touched upon dark doubts. They took shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut a few miles below the pass. Outside, a blizzard raged, but inside there was a silence far more destructive. "Why did you do it, Alara?" Andrew spoke for the first time in many hours. He sat by a small fire, and the silvery glow in his eyes had been replaced by a restless shadow. "I was meant to be the key. I was meant to forget, and the world was meant to be safe. Now, the Eater is bound by my guilt and your fear. I can feel him. I feel how every hesitation of yours weakens the seal." Alara, who was sharpening her dagger, looked up sharply. Her eyes were full of tears that refused to fall. "Are you blaming me? Are you blaming me for not letting you die? You're an angel, Andrew, or at least you were. You're used to grand gestures and eternal sacrifices. But I am human. I can't just watch you vanish. But your love is selfish." Andrew raised his voice, and in that moment, the ground beneath the hut trembled slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling. "The bond you created is fragile. If we begin to hate each other, if bitterness wins out within us, those seals in the mountains will simply explode. Are you prepared to bear the responsibility for the end of the world just because you wanted to keep a friend? I hate you for how easily you were willing to leave me," Alara shouted, throwing her dagger into the wooden table. "We fought together, we bled together, and you wanted to erase it all like a bad dream. Was I just a stop on the way to your holy redemption?" At that moment, the room filled with a violet light. A thin, jagged crack opened on the floor between them. It wasn't in the ground, but in reality itself. From the rift came the whisper of the Eater, sweet and poisonous, feeding on their rage. Andrew felt a physical pain in the scars on his back. It was as if someone were pouring hot coals into the wounds. He realized a terrifying truth: their argument was not just an exchange of opinions. It was an attack on the Eater's prison. Every sharp word was a hammer blow to the seals in the Hall of Echoes. "Alara, stop!" Andrew gasped, clutching the table. His face was ashen. "Look at the floor. We are feeding him. Our hatred is his key." Alara looked at the violet fracture, and her anger was replaced by pure dread. She saw in it reflections of her own doubts, the fear that she had never been anything more than a tool to Andrew. "He wants us to destroy each other," Andrew continued, taking a labored step toward her. "He wants me to resent you for your humanity, and he wants you to hate me for my past. If we allow it, the seals won't last until morning." Andrew placed a hand on her shoulder. This time it was not the hand of an angel, but the hand of a man, trembling with weakness. "You're right. I wanted to escape into oblivion because I was afraid to live with what I've done. My sacrifice was a coward's way out. You force me to stay and face it. It is much harder, but it is more real. Elara looked at him, and her breathing steadied. The crack on the floor began to slowly close as the tension in the room ebbed away. We will hate each other many more times, Andrew. We will have doubts. We are human. How can the prison survive that? It will only survive if we learn to forgive, Andrew said. Not just each other, but ourselves. My redemption doesn't end at the seals. It is only beginning. Every day that I do not betray you with my anger is a day the eater remains in chains. The rift vanished. Only the scent of ozone remained, and a silence that was no longer destructive, but humble. Andrew understood that his task was now far more complex than leading armies. He had to guard the peace within his own heart to save the world. Chapter 17: The Eye of Angelic Justice. Winter in the valley beneath the crying mountains had begun to break, but the air was still saturated with a frost that whispered of an alien presence. Andrew and Elara had settled in a small village at the base of the peaks, helping with the reconstruction, when a traveler appeared at the edge of the road. He was not like the others. He lacked the filthy clothes and the hollow, hungry gaze of the survivors. He was clad in simple gray wool, but he walked with a lightness that defied the weight of the mud on the path. His footsteps made no sound, and his skin was unnaturally smooth, devoid of a single scar or wrinkle that life in this cruel world might have etched into a face. Andrew felt him before he saw him. The scars on his back flared like liquid silver. Elara, he whispered. Get the weapons. We have company from home. The traveler stopped before Andrew and lowered his hood. His eyes were like two pieces of polished sapphire, beautiful, but without a shred of compassion. It was Ithuriel, one of the lower angels from Andrew's former squadron, a master of silence and tracking. Brother, Ithuriel spoke, his voice sounding like ice scraping against metal. Empyreum felt the tremor. The seals were not restored by heavenly fire, but by something impure. I have come to see what new treason you have committed in this mire. I am not your brother Ithuriel, Andrew replied, planting his feet firmly. I am just a man correcting the mistakes you refused to see. Ithuriel's gaze slid to Elara, who appeared with her bow in hand. A mortal. Is she the anchor that the shadows whisper about in the Hall of Echoes? You mix divine essence with the blood of a creature that will perish tomorrow? That is more than a fall, Andrew. That is sacrilege. That sacrilege is keeping the eater in chains, Elara snapped, aiming an arrow at the angel's chest. While you were up there polishing your armor, we were down here bleeding. Ithuriel only offered a cold smile. Do you think you saved the world? You created a wound that will never heal. Empyreum cannot allow the eater's prison to depend on the whims of two lovers. If your bond breaks, the world burns. My instructions are clear. Cut away the cause of instability. In that moment, Ithuriel drew his weapon, not a sword, but a whip of pure white light. If I kill you, Elara, Andrew's pain might briefly vibrate the seals, but then his essence will be released, and we will be able to seal them properly. Without your impure blood. The battle that followed was different from those before. Ithuriel was not slow like the monsters of the void. He moved like a flash of lightning. Andrew drew his ordinary sword, but against angelic light, it was nearly useless. He had to rely on his new power, his ability to feel and anticipate. Don't let him dominate you with his coldness! Andrew shouted to Elara as Ithuriel's whip coiled around her bow and shattered it to dust. Andrew lunged between them. The scars on his back began to burn so fiercely that silvery smoke erupted from his mouth. For the first time, he consciously used his bond with Elara as a weapon. He caught Ithuriel's light whip with his bare hands. The pain was unimaginable. He felt the heavenly fire searing his flesh. But instead of letting himself be consumed, Andrew channeled into that contact all his human weight, all the sorrow and weariness of the world. Look! Andrew roared. Do you feel it? This is what you have never known. This is the weight of life. Ithuriel staggered. Through the whip, emotions for which his angelic mind was not built began to flood into him. The fear of death, the love for another, the sensation of hunger, The angel screamed in horror. To him, it was pure agony. His perfect face contorted for the first time in human terror. Enough! Ithuriel cried out, tearing himself away from the contact. His radiance was now dimmed, his movements jerky. You are infected, you are like a plague, Andrew. Heaven will not just stand by and watch this. Ithuriel took flight, but it was not a majestic departure. It was the retreat of someone who had felt doubt for the first time. I will return with a legion. This bond must be severed. As the angel vanished into the clouds, Andrew sank to his knees, his palms burned to raw flesh. Elara ran to him and began to bandage his wounds. Now they won't just be coming after the Eater, she whispered. They'll be coming after us. I know, Andrew said, looking at the sky. My redemption now means protecting the earth not just from the darkness below, but from the cruel light from above. We must unite the people, Elara. We will need more than just the two of us when the heavens open. Chapter 18 Dirge of the Forged Heaven. Ithuriel's flight left a heavy calm in the valley. Andrew knew that angels knew no mercy, only efficiency. When they returned, they would not come to deliberate, they would come to erase the anomaly that he and Elara represented. Ordinary steel could not pierce angelic armor, and Andrew's new power was more of a shield than a sword. There is a place, Andrew said as they packed the few things they owned. In the days when the world was still young and angels walked among men like kings, there was a caste of smiths who learned to capture stardust. They forged a weapon called the Tear of the Morning Star. It is not a weapon for killing, but for grounding. Whoever is struck by it loses their connection to the ether and becomes mortal. Where is it? Elara asked, tightening the straps on her new quiver. In the ruins of the forgotten temple, deep beneath the black cliffs. The place is cursed because the angels tried to erase its existence from the maps. The journey to the black cliffs was lined with petrified trees and a silence that ached. When they reached the temple, they found only ruins swallowed by the earth. The entrance to the underground was guarded only by dust and the shadows of the past. Andrew felt the scars on his back tremble. The deeper they descended into the heart of the earth, the more the echo of celestial power returned, but it was twisted, full of the bitterness of those who had once been abandoned. In the lowest chamber, on an altar of black basalt, it lay. It was not a sword, but a long, slender spear, its tip formed of a translucent crystal that held a misty, silvery light within. As Andrew approached the weapon, figures materialized from the shadows. They were not enemies, but the ghosts of the smiths who had forged the tear. They had no faces, only hands constantly mimicking the motion of a hammer. Who seeks the tear? The voices whispered, sounding like the crushing of stone. Angel or man? Andrew stopped. He felt Elara's gaze on his back. The one who carries both, he answered firmly. I ask for the weapon not to rule, but to protect those who have no wings. The weapon demands a price. The ghost spoke. The tear of the morning star drinks the light from the one who holds it. If you lift it, the connection to the heavens that remains within you will be severed forever. You will never again hear the call of Empyreum. You will be bound to the dust of the earth eternally. Andrew looked at the spear and then at Elara. I made my choice long ago, he said softly. He reached out and gripped the hilt of the tear. In that moment, a wave of freezing energy surged through the chamber. Andrew screamed as he felt the spear suck the last remnants of angelic harmony from his soul. It was as if the last star in his interior had gone out. But as the pain receded, the spear grew heavy in his hands and began to pulse in the rhythm of his own human heart. It is done, Andrew breathed. His posture changed. He no longer appeared as a fallen being, but as a warrior who had found his tool. I am no longer their brother. I am their judge. In that very moment, the temple's ceiling shook under a crushing blow from above. Clouds parted over the black cliffs, and through them, pillars of blinding white light began to descend. Ithuriel had returned, and he was not alone. 7 angels in full plate armor, with wings like blades, hovered over the ruins. Andrew! Elara shouted, pointing to the sky. They are coming, Andrew said, firmly gripping the silvery spear. Alara, now we will see if our bond can carry the weight of a celestial legion. We must keep them away from the seals. If I fall in battle, you must take the tear and finish it. You're not falling anywhere, Alara snapped, drawing her daggers. We have the weapon. We have each other. And they have no idea what it means to fight for your life. Chapter 19: The Clash of Mirrors. The sky above the black cliffs tore like old canvas. 7 angelic figures descended in perfect formation, their radiance so intense that the stones beneath them began to crack from the heat. Ithuriel stood at the fore, his light whip now pulsing with a menacing, white energy. You have changed, Andrew. Ithuriel spoke, his voice echoing through the valley like thunder. You traded your nobility for rust and filth. And now you hold that heretical toy in your hands. Do you truly believe a shard of a fallen star can stop the will of the First Source? I believe I will teach you how to fall, Andrew replied, firmly gripping the tear of the morning star. The battle erupted with a ferocity the mortal world had never remembered. While Alara used her agility and the temple ruins to draw the attention of the other angels, Ithuriel swept directly down upon Andrew. Their weapons clashed in a flash that momentarily blinded every living thing within a mile. Andrew felt the tear reacting to Ithuriel's presence. The crystal at the spear's tip began to vibrate frantically. With every strike of Ithuriel's whip, Andrew had to brace himself with his entire human weight. He no longer had wings to grant him stability. He had only his feet in the mud and his will. Do you even know why you fell, brother? Ithuriel smirked during a clash of weapons. Do you think it was because of your compassion for Lyrian? Because of your rebellion? Andrew struck him with the shaft of the spear in the chest, but Ithuriel only gracefully danced back. What are you talking about? Your rebellion was planned. Ithuriel shouted, his eyes blazing with fanaticism. Empyreum needed a sacrifice. It needed someone to descend and use their own essence to stabilize the seals when they began to fail. They chose you because you were always weak, you always felt too much. Your humanity was merely a tool, Andrew. You are just a prison guard who was told he was a hero. Those words hit Andrew harder than any physical blow. For a fraction of a second, he wavered. His entire path to redemption, all that suffering, was it all just part of a celestial plan? Was his fall merely manipulation? The fracture in his soul cried out again. The scars on his back began to burn. Ithuriel seized the moment and lashed his whip, striking Andrew in the shoulder and knocking him to his knees. Look at yourself, Ithuriel mocked, raising the whip for the final blow. A manipulated angel playing at being a man. Your bond with that girl is just another chain holding you in the dust. Andrew looked at Alara. At that very moment, she was fighting 2 angels at once. Her movements were desperate but unyielding. She was fighting for him. She was fighting for a world that had betrayed her so many times. Something broke inside Andrew, but it wasn't doubt. It was pride, not angelic pride, but human pride. Perhaps I was a tool, Andrew exhaled, leaning heavily on the spear to stand. Perhaps my fall was planned. But what I found in the mud, what I feel for these people, that no longer belongs to you. You didn't plan for that. Andrew straightened up. The tear of the morning star lit up, not with a silvery light, but with a deep, warm golden glow. It wasn't the radiance of the heavens. It was the radiance of blood and earth. Ithuriel attacked, but Andrew no longer defended. He stepped forward, directly into the blow. The whip tore at his side, but Andrew did not falter. He drove the tip of the tear directly into the center of Ithuriel's glowing chest. Know the truth, Ithuriel, Andrew whispered. The spear's crystal connected with the angelic core. Death did not enter Ithuriel, but mortality did. In a single instant, the angel felt everything, the weight of his bones, the fear of finitude, the pain of injury, and above all, the massive, crushing loneliness of non-existence. Ithuriel's wings turned to ash in a heartbeat. His armor lost its luster and grew heavy. He fell to his knees, breathing air for the first time that burned in his lungs, and real, salty tears began to flow from his eyes. What have you done to me? Ithuriel stammered, his voice no longer sounding like thunder, but like that of a terrified boy. "I gave you a gift," Andrew said, withdrawing the spear. "Now you are one of us. Now heaven will no longer hear you. And now you will have to live with what you sought to destroy." The other angels stopped. They saw their commander crawling in the dust, vulnerable and broken. They felt something they had never known before: fear. Without a word, they took to the clouds, leaving Ithuriel in the mud. Elara ran to Andrew and supported him. "You did it," she breathed, looking at Ithuriel. "We did it," Andrew said, leaning on her. "But this was only the beginning. Heaven now knows we have a weapon that can bring them down. And Ithuriel, he is going to have to tell us everything about what else Empyreum is planning." Chapter 20: Resonance of the Fall. Ithuriel lay in the mud, his fingers clawing convulsively at the earth. His formerly perfect skin was now covered in filth and sweat. He was weeping, a raw, uncontrollable sob of someone feeling the finitude of their existence for the first time. But it wasn't just his pain that filled the air. Andrew felt a sharp jerk in the scars on his back. It was as if an icy jaw had clamped down on his spine. "Something is wrong," Andrew exhaled, dropping the spear. From the distance, from the direction of the crying mountains, came a deep rumble. It wasn't thunder, but the sound of the world cracking. The seals, which were founded on the human knot, on the bond between Andrew and Elara, began to vibrate frantically. Ithuriel's fall, that violent act of humanizing an angel, sent a wave of pure, unfiltered suffering into the ether, which acted like poison to the seals. "The Eater!" Elara shouted, looking toward the mountains. Above the peaks, a massive column of violet smoke began to rise toward the sky, devouring the stars. "Andrew, he's feeding on Ithuriel! The agony of his fall, it's a feast for him!" The Light Eater, imprisoned for thousands of years in silence and frost, now felt the echo of angelic essence mixed with human terror. It was exactly the fuel he needed to break the bond Andrew and Elara had created. "Look at him!" Elara pointed at Ithuriel. Black smoke of the void began to escape from the angel's mouth and eyes. Ithuriel was not just mortal, he had become a living portal. His body, unaccustomed to the weight of emotions, could not resist the pressure the Eater was exerting on him from the depths. "We have to kill him," Elara said, drawing her dagger. "We must sever the bond before the Eater passes through him into our world." Andrew looked at Ithuriel. He saw himself in him, on that first night after the fall. He saw the terror in his eyes, the terror of being alone and mortal. If they killed him in hatred, they would only confirm the Eater's power. "No," Andrew stopped her. "If we kill him, the seals will definitively shatter. They are built on compassion, Elara. If a murderer wins in my heart now, the Eater wins. We must try another way." Andrew knelt beside Ithuriel and took his trembling hand into his own burned palms. He felt the pitch-black darkness of the void flowing into him from the angel. It burned as if acid were coursing through his veins. "Ithuriel, listen to me!" Andrew roared into the chaos. "Stop fighting this like an angel! Accept it! Accept the pain, accept the fear! This isn't your end, it's your beginning! Don't let him use you as a door!" Ithuriel looked at him through the veil of black smoke. "It's too much, everything hurts." "I know!" Andrew shouted, pulling him closer. "But that pain is proof that you are alive! Fight for that pain!" In that moment, Elara leaned into both of them. She placed her hands on their joined palms. Her blood from the wound she had previously inflicted for the seal ritual mingled with their sweat. "There are 3 of us in this," she whispered. "A triangle is stronger than a knot." The earth beneath them heaved. The violet column above the mountains flared for a moment, and then, with a deafening explosion, collapsed in on itself. A wave of energy threw them all aside. When the dust settled, silence reigned over the black cliffs. The Eater was back in the depths, cast there not by force, but by the fact that Ithuriel had accepted his humanity and ceased to be an open wound. Ithuriel lay on his back, breathing jaggedly, but the smoke was gone. His eyes were no longer sapphire, they were gray as morning mist. "We survived it," Elara breathed, wiping blood from her forehead. Andrew sat up and looked at his hands. They were black with ash now, but for the first time, the scars on his back stopped burning. The seals held. But they are different now. They aren't just ours anymore, Elara. Now he belongs to them too. He looked at Ithuriel, who sat up with difficulty, looking at his human hands in confusion. Welcome to Earth, brother, Andrew said softly. It will hurt. It will be hard. And heaven will want to destroy us for it. But for the first time in eternity, you are truly free. Chapter 21. A Gathering of Broken Stars. Ithuriel's breath was still shallow and wheezing as his body learned to process oxygen without divine aid. He sat in the dust, running his fingers over his chest where the tear of the morning star had stripped him of immortality. I am not the only one. Ithuriel exhaled, his gray eyes meeting Andrew's. Empyreum does not mention it, Archangel. In the archives, those records are erased. But throughout the ages, not every fall was as loud as yours. Some simply left. Some were cast out for doubts that weren't big enough for rebellion, but large enough to cloud their light. Andrew stiffened. Are you saying there are others like us in this world? Hidden among humans? Yes. Ithuriel nodded. They are called the Silent Ones. They live as smiths, healers, or just hermits in the mountains. They deny their essence to escape the wrath of the heavens and the hunger of the void. But if the Eater is truly awakening through our emotions, their presence is like a fuse. If we don't find them, Empyreum will, and they will use them as fuel to restore the old order. Elara threw her cloak over her shoulders. So, do we have a list? Where do we start? Ithuriel closed his eyes as if trying to catch the last remnants of celestial intuition. I feel an echo to the west. In Fisherman's Bay by the Salt Cliffs. There is someone there who once belonged to the Order of Virtues. If they still live, their power over water and healing could stabilize the seals more than any weapon. Chapter 22. Fisherman's Bay. The journey to the sea took weeks. Ithuriel had to learn everything. How not to walk his feet into bloody sores, how to eat, and even how to sleep without being terrified by dreams. Andrew led him with a patience he hadn't possessed before, while Elara taught them both how to remain inconspicuous. The salt cliffs were lashed by a constant tide. Fisherman's Bay was a poor settlement where the people looked as old and wrinkled as the nets they mended. That is her. Ithuriel pointed to a woman standing knee-deep in the icy water, helping to pull in a boat. She was not radiant. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and hands coarsened by salt. But when Andrew looked closer, he saw it. The water around her feet did not move naturally. The waves avoided her as if they held her in reverence. Cassiel? Andrew addressed her as she stepped onto the shore. The woman stopped, and her gaze was like the depths of the ocean. She was neither startled nor joyful. I haven't heard that name for 500 years, fallen brother, she said calmly. Here, they call me Mara. And Mara just wants to finish drying her nets in peace. The world is ending, Cassiel, Ithuriel interjected, taking a step forward. Cassiel looked at him and offered a faint smile. I see Andrew taught you how to fall, Ithuriel. It hurts, doesn't it? The weight of a human heart. We didn't come to judge you, Andrew said, pointing to his scars. We came to ask for your help. The Light Eater is waking, and our bond with humanity is the only thing holding him back. We need your stability. We need to unite those who know what it means to lose heaven and love the earth. Cassiel looked at the fishermen in the bay, at the children playing in the sand, and at the horizon where unnaturally violet clouds were already beginning to gather. Do you know why I left? She asked softly. Because in heaven there is no ebb and flow. Only an eternal, motionless brightness. Here things change. Here things end. And that is what makes every moment precious. If you want my help, I will not fight for heaven. I will fight for this dirty bay. That is exactly what we need. Elara nodded. At that moment, the sea began to boil. It wasn't fish that emerged from the waves, but twisted beings of the void with bodies like black glass and many limbs. The Eater had sent his hunters to prevent the unification of the fallen. Andrew gripped the tear of the morning star, Alara drew her daggers, and Ithuriel, though his hands shook, raised a heavy boat hook. Cassiel straightened up and, for the first time in centuries, allowed her power to manifest. The sea behind her rose into a massive, menacing wall. "My nets are empty today," Cassiel said, her voice resonating from the depths. "But you will be glad to be caught in them." Chapter 23: Baptism by Salt Blood. The battlefield became wet sand and rot-scented seaweed. The creatures from the depths, twisted by the void, surged from the surf like a black tidal wave. Their bodies of black glass absorbed the light and emitted a sound reminiscent of crushing ice. Cassiel stood at the fore, her hands tracing complex circles, and the seawater under her command formed ramparts that crushed the attackers against the cliffs. But with every strike of a wave, Cassiel grew paler. Her human body, which she had grown accustomed to over the centuries, was not built for such an onslaught of divine power. "They're killing her!" Alara cried out, seeing Cassiel sink to her knees. "That power will tear her apart from the inside before she can stop those things." Andrew tried to fight his way to Cassiel through a swarm of glass monsters, but he was surrounded. His spear, the tear of the morning star, shattered the black shells of the enemies, but there were too many of them. Ithuriel stood nearby. He gripped a heavy boat hook in his hands, felt the burning emptiness of his missing wings on his back, and in his heart, he felt for the first time what humans call paralyzing terror. It wasn't the fear of an angel facing God's wrath, it was the fear of a mortal facing the end. He looked at his trembling hands and then at Andrew and Alara, who were fighting with utter self-sacrifice. I am just a man," Ithuriel whispered to himself. "I can do nothing." At that moment, however, he saw one of the largest monsters, a colossus with dozens of glass blades instead of limbs, preparing to impale Cassiel, who was too exhausted for further defense. Ithuriel did not make a rational decision. He didn't think about strategy. He simply felt a sudden surge of anger and belonging flood his chest. That feeling was so strong it drowned out his instinct for self-preservation. "Enough!" Ithuriel roared in a voice that was no longer angelic but full of human defiance. He ran. Not with the lightness of a celestial, but with the heavy, dogged sprint of a man. He threw himself directly beneath the blades of the glass monster. One of them cut deep into his shoulder, but Ithuriel did not stop. He braced his feet in the slippery mud and with all his might drove the boat hook into a crack in the creature's chest. "Andrew! Now!" Ithuriel shouted, his blood staining the gray wool of his clothes. Andrew seized the second the monster lost its balance. He lunged and drove the tear of the morning star directly into the creature's core. The black glass shattered into dust. A wave of energy from the shattered monster threw Ithuriel several meters away onto the rocks. The battle fell silent for a moment as the remaining creatures, under the pressure of Cassiel's final wave, retreated back into the depths. Andrew and Alara ran to Ithuriel. He lay in the sand, his breath wheezing, and thick, dark red blood flowed from the wound in his shoulder. "Ithuriel," Andrew whispered, kneeling beside him. "Why did you do it? You could have run." Ithuriel smiled faintly, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. I wanted to know if it was worth it," he breathed with effort. "You were right, brother. It hurts. But for the first time in my life, I actually felt something. I chose this wound. Heaven cannot do that." Cassiel approached them. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes held a new kind of respect. She placed her salty, cold hands on Ithuriel's wound. Her power manifested as a gentle humming of the tide. The bleeding stopped and the flesh began to slowly close, though the scar that remained would be deep. "You will survive," Cassiel said softly. "You will have a scar to remind you of your first human choice. And that scar will give you greater power than all your lost wings." Ithuriel closed his eyes, exhausted, but with an expression of peace he had never known as an angel. "Did you see that?" Alara asked, looking at the horizon. The violet clouds had not dissipated. Instead, they began to form into the likeness of a massive eye, looking directly at them. "The Eater saw what Ithuriel did. He saw that even those we broke can stand by our side. He no longer fears us just for our power," Andrew said, raising his spear. "He fears us for our ability to change. Cassiel, are you with us?" Cassiel looked at the fishing boats that had survived the battle, and then at Andrew. "The sea is stormy, brother. And I know how to tame storms. I will go with you. We must find the others. If Ithuriel, the coldest among us, could bleed for a mortal, then there is hope for us all." Chapter 24. The Iron Heart of Farum. The journey to Farum was marked by a gradual transformation of the landscape. Nature here gave way to industrial chaos. Trees were replaced by towering chimneys that spewed thick, yellowish smoke into a leaden sky. Farum was not a city in the conventional sense. It was a massive, constantly moving machine of iron, copper, and steam, built within the crater of an ancient meteor strike. The atmosphere inside the walls was oppressive. The city's inhabitants moved in time with the rhythm of pistons, their faces ashen and their eyes hollow. In Farum, there was no art, no religion. The only faith was efficiency. "Do you feel it?" Ithuriel whispered, wiping soot from his forehead. "The silence in their souls. It's the same as it was in Empyreum before the fall. No doubt, no passion. Only function." Barakiel, prisoner in the gears. In the center of the city rose the great Cathedral of Gears, which served as the central processing unit for all of Farum. The group had to navigate a labyrinth of steam pipes and rotating shafts until they reached the main boiler. There they found him. Barakiel, once an angel of the Order of Powers, was not visible as a single being. His consciousness was poured into thousands of miles of copper wires and pipes. His face appeared occasionally as a relief on the metal wall of the main generator, his eyes formed by glass viewports through which mercury flowed. "Why do you disturb the gears?" Barakiel spoke through hundreds of metal-speaking tubes. His voice was mechanical, composed of thousands of echoes. "Pain has been eliminated. Fear has been filtered out. Farum is perfect because Farum does not feel. Farum is dying, Barakiel!" Andrew shouted, striking the butt of his spear against the metal floor. "Your absence of feeling has created a vacuum that the void is eating through. Look at your people, they aren't beings. They are just parts you discard when they wear out." A short circuit in stasis. The void manifested in Farum as black corrosion, subtly eating away at the cathedral's support columns. In his logic, Barakiel ignored it because it represented no emotional threat to him. Andrew understood that he had to force Barakiel into a system shock. He had to restore his human essence. He used the tear of the morning star and, instead of attacking the metal, drove the tip of the spear directly into the main node where Barakiel's essence met the steam. "Remember what it was like to have wings!" Andrew roared, channeling memories of sun and wine through the spear. In that moment, Farum experienced something unimaginable. The massive piston stopped. Thousands of gears jammed with a deafening screech. The entire city plunged into darkness. From the speaking tubes, instead of mechanical announcements, came a single, human cry of agony and relief. A figure began to emerge from the generator. Steam condensed into the form of a man with copper-colored skin and hair like liquid silver. Barakiel fell to his knees, feeling the weight of his body and the coldness of the floor for the first time in centuries. "It's too loud," Barakiel gasped, clutching his head. "All this pounding, is that my heart?" The Forge of Hope. Barakiel's transformation did not destroy the city but awakened it. As the angel became mortal again, his genius combined with his new capacity for compassion. He understood that courage alone would not be enough against the Eater and the heavenly legions. During the final days of their stay in Farum, Barakiel opened secret workshops. With Ilara's help, as she described what it felt like to be vulnerable, he forged star steel armor for the entire group. "This metal is not indestructible," Barakiel said, handing Andrew a new breastplate that looked like a work of smithing blended with stardust. "But it reacts to the will of the wearer. If your heart does not waver, this armor will not crack even under the strike of an archangel." As the group left Farum, the city was no longer a silent machine. People in the streets were talking, the first flowers appeared in windows, and the rhythm of the pistons was no longer a prison, but the heartbeat of a new alliance. Betrayal walked with them, gripping a heavy smith's hammer in one hand and carrying the burden of his new, painful freedom in the other. Chapter 25: The Army of Scars. The journey from the Iron City back to the Crying Mountains became a march that legends will speak of for centuries. It was no longer just a handful of refugees, but a growing tide of humanity. Andrew, Ilara, Ithuriel, and now Betrayal and Cassiel led a procession that numbered thousands of souls. The campsite beneath the Silver Pass became the heart of a new world. Thousands of fires shone into the darkness like a reflection of the stars that the angels were preparing to extinguish. The atmosphere in the camp was not filled with fear, but with a strange, electric determination. The Council of the Broken. The leaders gathered in the main tent, illuminated only by Betrayal's mechanical lamps. Andrew no longer wore angelic armor, but plates of star steel, forged by Betrayal. Ithuriel trained young men and women in spear combat. His face was stern, but when a recruit stumbled, he no longer mocked them, he reached down and helped them up. Cassiel created a cleansing bath in the center of the camp, where her water stripped people not only of filth but of the nightmares that the void sowed in their minds. Betrayal and his engineers from Ferrum mounted giant ballistae on the camp's ramparts, firing projectiles infused with his own essence. Andrew's sermon in the dust. One night, as the frost from the mountains became unbearable, Andrew stepped onto a high boulder. The people fell silent. They expected a god to speak to them, to promise them heaven. "I have not come to promise you salvation," Andrew began, and his voice, though human, had a depth that cut through the wind. "I have not come to tell you that golden halls await you after death. I have come to tell you the truth. Heaven has forgotten you, and the void wants to devour you. You have only each other." He pointed to the scars on his back, which he now left uncovered. "Angels are perfect, and therefore they are cold. You are injured, broken, and tired. But it is in your scars that there is a strength heaven does not know. It is called solidarity. Tomorrow, fight not for the gods, but for the person standing next to you. Fight for the dirt you walk upon." Ilara, the bridge between worlds. While Andrew was a symbol of faith, Ilara was a symbol of reality. She walked among the tents, checked supplies, sharpened arrows, and spoke with mothers who feared for their children. She became the mother of the army. One night, Andrew found her sitting at the edge of a cliff. "You used to want to kill me," he said softly. Ilara smiled and stroked the string of her bow. "You used to be just another monster looking down on us from above. Now you're one of us, Andrew. Perhaps the most vulnerable one. Those people down there, they aren't going into battle for an angel. They are going into battle for you, because you taught them that even a fallen star can provide warmth." The last night before the storm. The army of scars was ready. Smiths from Ferrum, fishermen from the coast, bandits who had found honor, and simple peasants. Each of them bore the mark of a broken wing on their armor or clothing, a symbol of their refusal to submit to celestial dictates, or the emptiness of nothingness. As the violet smoke of the eater began to rise over the mountains and the white light of angelic trumpets began to flash through the clouds, the army of scars responded with silence. It was the silence of thousands of hearts that had decided they would no longer be mere pawns in the struggle of the powerful. "Tomorrow," Andrew whispered to Ilara, "the world will learn that even dust can stop eternity." Chapter 26: The Siege of Reality. Dawn at the Black Cliffs was not announced by the sun, but by the tearing of the very fabric of the universe. The sky split into two spheres. To the west, the void festered like a purple wound, leaking the intangible darkness of the Eater. To the east, the gate of Empyreum swung open, pouring out a white, blinding light that felt not warm, but chilling in its perfection. The army of scars stood in the middle, a small island of mortality between two divine millstones. The first clash, white death and black glass. The battle began without warning. Legions of angels descended from the sky, their wings forming an impenetrable wall of radiant steel. At their head stood Archangel Azrael, a being with a face carved from crystal, who knew no doubt. Traitors and worms! Azrael thundered. Your existence ends in purification! Simultaneously, a wave of the Eater's creatures surged from the shadows beneath the mountains. They were faceless entities, swallowing both sound and hope. Andrew, leading his army, raised the tier of the morning star. Form up! Elara roared, her voice cutting through the angelic trumpets. Star steel to the front! The people of Farum formed an unbreakable wall of shields. When the white fire of the angels struck them, the shields glowed but did not melt. Barakiel's technology, infused with the essence of a fallen angel, achieved the impossible. It held the divine assault at bay. Dance of the Fallen. While the humans held the line against the monsters from below, Andrew and his 3 fallen brothers took to the air, not with wings, but with mechanical augments and their remaining will. Cassiel turned the moisture in the clouds into spears of ice. She created a massive vortex that dragged angels from the sky directly into the mud, where the swords of mortals awaited them. Ithuriel, fighting with the fury of one who knows what it means to lose everything, hurled himself into the ranks of the angelic legions. His boat hook, now tempered in silvery blood, tore through angelic wings like paper. Barakiel operated the ballistae from the ground. Every shot was a precision strike into the energy cores of the angelic formations. The center of the storm, Andrew versus Azrael. Andrew clashed with Azrael in midair, atop the ruins of the Hall of Echoes. Azrael's sword was a flame that scorched the very air, but Andrew's tear shone with a calm, human light. How low you have fallen, Andrew! Azrael spat. Protecting this filth instead of eternity. This filth has names, Azrael! Andrew replied, parrying a strike that would have split a mountain. They have dreams, they have fear, and they have courage you will never understand, because you are just a puppet without a heart. With every clash of their weapons, waves of energy were released, dispersing the violet mist of the Eater. Andrew did not fight with hatred, but with a profound sadness. Every blow was guided by the effort to show Azrael what he had realized, that the world below was worth saving. Elara and the resistance of the earth. On the ground, Elara found herself surrounded by shadows. The Eater tried to consume her mind, showing her the deaths of her loved ones once again. But Elara was no longer that lonely girl from the woods. Around her stood the men and women she had trained. Look at me! She screamed to her soldiers. It is not the darkness that scares us, but our own doubt. The light is in us, not in them. With those words, she fired an arrow infused with Andrew's essence. The arrow did not hit a monster, it struck the earth itself, releasing a wave of pure hope that shattered the shadows for 100 meters. Inspired by her example, the people launched a counterattack with a roar that drowned out even the thunder of the mountain. The breaking point. The battle reached a stalemate. Heaven could not triumph over human defiance, and the void could not consume those who no longer feared their pain. At that moment, Andrew realized that this war had no winner on the battlefield. The Eater was feeding even on this bloodshed. He looked at Elara, who nodded to him from below. They both knew what had to come. They had to end the battle not with a sword, but with a sacrifice that would change the rules of existence. Andrew pushed off from the ruins one last time, knocked Azrael to the ground, and headed into the depths of the mountain, into the Hall of Echoes, where the others were already waiting for him for the final ritual. Heaven doesn't pay for this, Andrew whispered as he vanished into the bowels of the earth. This is the Song of the Earth. Chapter 27, The Sacrifice of the Knot. The Hall of Echoes had turned into a living hell. The walls of black obsidian, which had once coldly reflected the light, now bled with violet darkness. The Eater was no longer just a distant threat, it was a pulsing, formless center of the universe, struggling to turn reality inside out. The air was so thick with hatred that it was nearly impossible to breathe. Andrew, Elara, Ithuriel, Cassiel, and Barakiel reached the central seal just as its final ring began to crumble. I can't hold it anymore, Andrew shouted over the roar of destructive energy. We have to connect. We must feed the seal a truth the Eater cannot digest. They took each other's hands, forming a circle of mortality around the cracking pillar. At that moment, the Eater launched its final assault. It did not send physical force, but invaded their minds. Each of them faced their worst nightmare. Betrayal saw the world as an infinite machine, where he was nothing but a rusted screw that no one needed. Cassiel saw the oceans dried to dust and herself as the last drop of water evaporating in the void. Ithuriel faced the face of Archangel Azrael, mocking him for trading eternity for filth and blood. Alara saw Andrew turning to ash, leaving her alone in the darkness. But Andrew, standing in the middle of that mental fury, cried out, "Now!" Instead of resisting, they allowed the most painful parts of their souls to flow into the seals. Ithuriel poured in the human humility he had redeemed through his pride. Cassiel surrendered her eternity for a single, precious breath. Betrayal sacrificed his logic for a messy but warm compassion. Alara placed into the seal her courage to love someone who could die at any second. And finally, Andrew. He surrendered not only his power but his guilt. He accepted that Lyrian was his sin, but that this sin had taught him to love the world. He placed his human imperfection into the seal. In that instant, the Hall of Echoes lit up with a light that was neither white like heaven nor black like the void. It was the golden light of a setting sun. This energy, woven from human emotions, pierced the Eater like a million needles. With a roar of agony that vibrated the very foundations of the mountains, the entity of nothingness collapsed in on itself. The seals slammed shut with a sound like the closing of massive doors. The rifts to both heaven and the void vanished. A wave of calm spread across the entire world, extinguishing angelic fires and driving away the shadows. Andrew felt the last bond with eternity snap within his body. He fell to his knees, his vision faded, and he slipped into a darkness accompanied no longer by fear, but by a deep, human peace. Chapter 28, Epilogue, Earth Beneath the Feet. 1 year later. The Oakhaven Valley was in full bloom. The air smelled of barley and freshly chopped wood. In the village square, where a gallows once stood, there was now a small stone monument. No name was engraved upon it, only the inscription, "To those who were not afraid to fall, so that we might stand." Betrayal had become the chief builder of the valley. He designed a system of mills that required no magic, only wind and human ingenuity. The people loved him for his patience, even though he still occasionally spoke to the gears as if they were old friends. Ithuriel founded a school in the mountains. He didn't teach combat there, but philosophy and history. He often sat with his students on the edge of the cliffs, looking at the stars. He no longer saw them as home, but only as beautiful, distant lights that belonged equally to everyone. Cassio remained a wanderer. She traveled from village to village, teaching people healing arts and singing them songs of the sea. It was said that wherever she stayed the night, the wells would never run dry and dreams were peaceful. Andrew and Alara lived at the edge of the forest, in a house Andrew had built with his own hands. Andrew was no longer a being of silver and fire. He was a man with muscled arms, wrinkles around his eyes, and deep scars on his back that never glowed again. One warm evening, they sat on their doorstep. Andrew was cleaning his old tools, and Alara was reading a letter from Ithuriel. "He writes that Betrayal has finally built a clock that doesn't run slow." Alara smiled, setting the paper aside. "He says it is his greatest victory over eternity." Andrew set down his whetstone and looked at his hands, stained with dirt and labor. "Time," he whispered. "It's a strange thing to have. To feel it slipping away, and to know that every hour is a gift, not a given." Alara sat closer and took his hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The flight? That limitless power?" Andrew looked at the mountains where he had once fought the shadows, and then back at Alara, at her face, which was aging just as his was, growing more beautiful with every new wrinkle. "I flew for thousands of years and saw billions of worlds," Andrew said, drawing her close. "But only when I stopped flying did I truly begin to feel the earth beneath my feet. Only when I lost my power did I find my purpose. No, Alara. I don't miss it. Because up there I was immortal, but only here, with you, am I alive. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars rose over Oakhaven. They were silent, distant, and calm. The world was imperfect, full of labor, pain, and joy, but it was a world that belonged to the people. And that was the greatest reward a fallen angel could ever receive.